Dr. Seema Jalani, thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Jalani, Senior Technical Advisor at the International Rescue Committee, where she leads their emergency health responses globally. She's recently joined an emergency team of doctors from IRC and Medical Aid for Palestinians who went to central Gaza to volunteer in the Al-Aqsa Hospital. And that does it for today's show. I'm Nermeen Sheikh with Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.
The viewpoints expressed in this program are the opinions of the people expressing them, and not necessarily those of Fresh Air Incorporated, its staff, or its board of directors.
Hi, this is Al McFarlane, host of The Conversation with Al McFarlane. You're listening to 90.3 FM, KFAI, Minneapolis.
Hello, this is Irma McClaurin. I am the Culture and Education Editor for Insight News, and I am sitting in for Al McFarlane. And joining me as a co-host will be Yusef Mgeni. And today, what we're going to talk about is why we need Black History Month every damn day of the year. And I wrote an article about 13 years ago, believe it or not, in which I expressed the need for that. And in that article, which I'm actually we're going to reprint with an updated introduction, it was really talking about the necessity of us not just using 1 month to tell the history of Black Americans in this country, but actually it needs to be part of the everyday curriculum of all education. And so I'm wondering if we can pull that up, that old article, so people can see. And it happened that I was at an ASALH convention, and we were talking about, the people with me are at the top there. To the left is Dr. Marilyn Thomas Houston, who's they're all Black anthropologists, myself with a different hairstyle. Dr. Sybil Rosada, who is an anthropologist, sociologist at Benedict College, and Dr. Faye Harrison. And we were all there to talk about the need for Black studies every damn day of the year. And so here we are 13 years later, and we're still celebrating it only a month. And I want to make the claim that we need to do it even more so. And so I wanted to ask Yusef, because he actually has a backstory about the person that we call the father of Black History Month, and that's Carter G. Woodson. So Yusef, if you can tell us a little bit about that.
Certainly, Dr. Irma, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Dr. Carter G. Woodson is the founder of Black History Month. It was originally Negro History Week, celebrated the second week in February between the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. And in 1976, in honor of the bicentennial, it became African or Black History Month. And this is the 98th observance in 2024. It's been taking place since 1926. So in just 2 years, we will have the 100th anniversary. And why we should celebrate it every year, let me give you a couple of quotes. The first is from noted historian Dr. John Henrik Clarke, who says, "History is how a person uses their talent to create memories that give them respect and command the respect of other people. History develops a pride and awareness in people so that they can become better instruments for living together with other people. This sense of identity," Clarke would conclude, "is the stimulation for all of a people's honest and creative endeavors." One other short quote, which I really love, is from Saunders Redding, and it was included in The Negro Writer and His Roots. Redding says, History is a clock that people use to tell their time of day. It is a compass which people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. The relationship between any people and their history is the same as the relationship between a child and its mother. History not only tells the people where they are and what they are, but more importantly, it tells the people where they still must go and what they still must be and do. So I think that encapsulates why we need to celebrate Black history every damn day of the year. And we do that in tribute to Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black history, the dean of Black history, and the founder of African American History Month.
Well, I think that's a good way to invite people to think about this, to consider what is it that needs to be done so that we can see, to have this information available. And for me, it's not just about Black History Month, but it's about everybody's history being incorporated. And so what I'd like to do is to invite our first guest, Reiko Ho, who is an accomplished director and theater maker from Hawaii. And I wonder how, in some ways, her history is being told in the work that she's doing. She's the Associate Artistic Director for Honolulu Theatre for Youth. She's a member of the Consortium of Asian American Theaters and Artists and on the board of directors for TYA USA. She's currently in residence at the Children's Theater Company in Minneapolis, where her show, The Carp Who Would Not Quit, which she wrote and directed, is playing as a part of CTC's season. Her upcoming projects include a new work, which she is writing and directing, The Great Race, the story of the Chinese Zodiac, for the Honolulu Theatre for Youth. The Great Race is a recent recipient of a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. And so what we're seeing is how everyone's history needs to be incorporated. So Reiko, welcome to the conversation with Al McFarlane.
Aloha. Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure. I just learned a lot about Black History Month just from listening backstage. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, tell us a bit about your history, because it looks like it is what's driving you to do the kind of theatrical productions that you do. So tell us about this work that's currently being shown, at the theater here, but also about your own background and how you use your history and your experience in your work.
Well, as we know, representation is ever more important, and conversations about race and where we're from and sharing those stories is so very important to all of us and all of our histories. And a lot of us have complicated histories with America,
Yes.
right? And I am Yonsei. I'm fourth generation born and raised in Hawaii. My great-grandparents came to work on the plantations that were here in Hawaii. So I come from that very humble and hardworking stock. And I am still considered a visitor in Hawaii. Hawaii is the home of the indigenous Hawaiian people. So we are still guests in their home, and I'm still learning about how to engage in that way in my very own backyard. But here I am in Minneapolis with this show that was meant for preschoolers in Hawaii. It was canceled by the pandemic, and then it found a new life. And this show is my kind of a love letter to my childhood growing up. I'm part Japanese, and so it is a love letter to my childhood and about being Japanese and being from Hawaii and told from that lens. So it's a very Japanese American lens, and I hope it fills people with delight and joy, because I think healing starts with delight and joy,
Yes.
especially with children. And I think they should be part of every important conversation.
How long is the production running?
We have 2 more weeks, so we have a whole lot of shows left. We're performing actually like 12 shows a week.
Wow.
Yes. So in the mornings we perform for the school children, the school keiki, and then we have evening performances and like 6 shows during the weekends for public audiences.
And so can you tell us a bit about how do children respond to this particular story, which is about a carp, which is a fish, right? And, in Minneapolis, everybody knows about fish. So tell us a bit.
I just learned about the invasive carp here.
Yes.
not that carp.
Okay.
It's actually a collection of 6 folktales, Japanese and Okinawan folktales, and they all Japanese folktales often have a lesson, and some of the lessons that the stories impart are perseverance, which is the carp who would not quit, right? It's perseverance, bravery, believing in yourself, gratitude, kindness to others. So those are all kind of the through lines of all the stories that are being told. And I'm so delighted with how audiences are responding. It just shows me that our stories connect us all and that they're universal.
Absolutely. And so you have a lot on your plate in terms of what you want to do in the future. Can you tell us a little bit about your future work as well? And if it's all aimed at children, or do you plan to, are you going to be doing things for adults as well? Or maybe maybe it doesn't matter.
Yeah, for me, it doesn't matter, but I do work for adults too. And even my work in theater for youth, I feel that there's a child in all of us, and I direct my work at families as well as children. So I hope that everything that I do creates a conversation. It's a conversation starter for families about race and stories and voice. And I love when children can see themselves on stage, because when I was growing up, there were no people of color really performing on stage. Even in Hawaii, it was a very white-dominated field. So I'm really, it's really gratifying for me to be able to share these kinds of stories. So I'm working on a story that is a very famous Chinese story, because I'm part Chinese as well. So I'm also mixed Asian, which is its own unique kind of thing.
Yes.
Yes. And so this story I pitched because there was so much anti-Asian hate and anti-Chinese sentiment during the pandemic.
Sure.
And it made me really sad when I heard about our grandparents being pushed into the subway and all the terrible slurs that were being flung around, in this day and age, which, none of us are surprised at, but still is very hurtful. So I decided that I wanted to do a show that honored my Chinese upbringing, and we're using traditional Chinese lion dance and kung fu. It's centered around the traditions of Chinese New Year. And it's about how the zodiac animals got onto the zodiac. It's a very famous Chinese fable.
Fantastic. And so, there's a lot happening these days on Netflix and on Prime, all of these different shows. And we're seeing, a real interest, some of the trending movies that are coming from Korea. They're coming from, Asia and Asian American. And so how does that impact your work? Do you think it makes people more receptive to what you're doing? Do you think it helps people understand better what you're trying to communicate?
I actually think a lot of the change happened during the pandemic with Black Lives Matter and all of the anti-Asian hate and movements that followed. I think that the conversation is changing, and I'm eager to be a part of that conversation and allied to whatever other causes, that for people that need their voice to be heard. So yes, I think the conversation is changing, and I'm not sure it's because there's more media, out there for consumption. Perhaps that's also because the conversation is changing. So people are more interested in different kinds of media and watching different types of shows, which is all good as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And what you've shown us, which is what we were trying to convey earlier, is the importance of the historical kinds of folk tales, the history of people, and how that gets woven into the creative works and everything. So Yusef, any other questions?
No, I just wanted to say thank you, Reiko, very much for sharing your history and the information about the carp that wouldn't quit, showing for 2 more weeks at the Children's Theatre in Minneapolis.
So time for people to go out and get their tickets. Yes. And
yes,
so
thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us. Yusef, we didn't get a chance to say that one of the things that I talk about in my article is about ASALH, which is the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, but its original title was in
Association
fact,
for the Study of Negro Life and History.
and
Yeah.
that was founded by Carter G. Woodson. And what do you have any sense? I know that you've written an article about this, and we're hoping that, you know, Insight News can reprint that one as well alongside mine. What was the response to Carter G. Woodson when he was doing this?
Well, Carter G. Woodson was an acclaimed academic. He was the superintendent of schools in the Philippines. He taught at a number of colleges and universities in the United States. He attended the Sorbonne. Carter G. Woodson was the second person to receive a PhD in history, second African American from Harvard. And a lot of people are unaware, he had to go to court and sue Harvard University to attain his PhD in African and African American history. He set aside his very comfortable academic career and traveled around the country, Dr. Irma, speaking in church basements, in barbershops, in community halls, anywhere that people were willing to listen, encouraging people to start local Negro history groups. And he began two publications in the 1920s, quarterlies, academic quarterlies, because the white historical publications refused to publish information about African and African American history. And to his credit, those quarterly publications are still published to this day, almost 100 years later.
Wow.
And as I said earlier, 1915, I believe, was when the association was established. And 1926 was when Negro History Week was established, again, between the birthdays of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln in the second week of February, until 1976, when it became Black History Month or African History Month, which continues to this day. So people were very grateful to get the information that Dr. Woodson shared. And again, he traveled around the country at his own expense and spoke wherever Black people would allow him about local and national Black or Negro history at that point in time, and encouraged people to establish Negro history study clubs and Negro history debates and other opportunities to discuss and share the history of African and Africans in America.
You know, and I think it's important that people understand that while we often celebrate Black history by reading books and by watching movies, that there's another aspect of Black history that sometimes gets forgotten, and those are Black communities. And before we move to that, I want to invite everyone to say that you're listening to the conversation with Al McFarlane, and you can find us on YouTube at Insight News MN and also on the Black Press USA. We're broadcasting live, and we invite you to subscribe to us so that you can get notices about when we're having great shows like this. And so one of the things that I want to talk about are these Black communities. I was faculty at the University of Florida. And while I was in Gainesville, what I didn't realize is that some of the residents of Gainesville were actually people who had escaped from Rosewood. Rosewood was a Black community that was burned to the ground, and the people were forced to leave because whites did not like the fact that they were prosperous. And so there's currently underway another fight to save a Black Florida community. If you can pull that up. And so this is a story that began something like this. When Sakara Jackson travels from Tallahassee back to the place she will always call home, the historically Black community of Royal in Central Florida, she sometimes shuts her eyes against the glare of the sun and tries to imagine what it was like. What was it like for her great-great-grandfather, Jim Patterson, to make his way in the years after the Civil War from the plantation he was born on in Waycross, Georgia, to Royal? where he would become one of the few newly freed Black Americans granted land by the US government under the Homestead Act of 1862. What was it like for the scores of other newly freed men who settled in Royal, hacking their way through dense thickets of sea grape and prickly pear, and through their labors into ownership of government-deeded parcels of 40 to 160 acres each? And these are stories that we don't often hear about because we believe that the 40 acres and a mule was actually a myth, that nobody got it, but apparently people did. And I know for a fact that in just outside of Mobile, Alabama, where I am currently residing sometimes, there is a 16-acre farm, 1,600-acre farm that is owned by a Black family, and that's been in their family for years. And they tell the story too of how people have been trying to take that away from them. And so this story goes on to say, what was it like for the descendants of the original founders to somehow hold on to their land, even as the promise of the early years of Reconstruction gave way to white nationalist violence, and the few other communities of Black homesteaders in the country were wiped out by racial terror and development-led displacement? And so here is what I remember. What was it like for the people of Royal to survive when the terror closed in and the Black community in Okosee, just 50 miles away, was wiped out in 1920 by a white mob? And when Rosewood, which I mentioned, which is just outside the Gainesville, Florida, another Black community 77 miles away, was burned to the ground 3 years later. This is the Black history, Yusef, that people don't really know about and need to understand. And so we know that there was an attempt to use development to change Eatonville, which is where Zora Neale Hurston grew up, and they were able to stave that off. But these Black communities, Black cemeteries, these are also Black history symbols and evidence that we were present, right? And they need to be protected. And so one of the people that I'm delighted, to bring in as a guest is actually one of my former students. The world gets smaller and smaller. And so I want to introduce to you, to invite Dr. Deborah Johnson-Simon to come on. She's a museum anthropologist, one of my former students. I'm very proud of her. And she is the founder and CEO of the African Diaspora Museology Institute. I think, Cooper, that we have a view of that at the Facebook page. It's in Savannah, Georgia, formerly known as the Center for the Study of African and African Diaspora Museums and Communities. It's a research lab dedicated to scholarly investigation of the history and culture of the African diaspora descendant experiences surrounding Black cultural institutions. And do we have a view of that particular page so we can see that? And so Deborah has been working, Dr. Johnson-Simon, I keep calling her Deborah, but she really is Dr. Johnson-Simon. She's earned it. Has worked on for more than 30 years on museum and cultural heritage projects in several states, including Arizona, Florida, Maryland, Virginia, South Carolina, and now in Georgia. She's conducted research on African descendant museums in Belize, Ghana, and Halifax, Nova Scotia. Additionally, she's taught at Santa Fe Community College in Gainesville and the University of Florida, both of them in Gainesville, Florida, which is where she received her PhD in anthropology and was one of my students. She earned her MA in anthropology and museum studies from Arizona State University in Tempe, Arizona, and her BA in anthropology sociology from Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida, which is actually where Zora Neale Hurston once was there. She is currently an adjunct professor at Savannah State University in the Department of Social and Behavior Sciences, where she teaches anthropology. And she's presented her research on Museum Association and Anthropology Association panels and to discussion groups, because her research is really unique in this area of academia. What I love about Deborah or Dr. Deborah, is that she has done many books called Cultural Keepers Arizona Cultural Keepers, Florida, we're cooking it up again. Recipes to celebrate the 1983 Blacks in Museums Directory. Kids can cook it up too. Anya visits the James E. Lewis Museum of Art. And there's so many more, because what she also does is to write books that encourage children to understand the value of museums. And she also co-authors these with her grandchildren. So I'm going to bring Deborah on, because what I want her to focus on is the Kaya Museum story, which documents the life and work of portrait artist and museum founder, Virginia Jackson Kaya. Is it Kia or Kaya?
Kaya.
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 And that museum was located, and Virginia Kaya was located in Savannah, Georgia. So Deborah, tell us a bit about, what you've been doing and how important is the work that you're doing to supporting and us understanding the richness of Black history.
First, thank you for having me. I think it's really special, and I don't take it lightly that you asked me. And even though you said, "Oh, it's kind of last minute," I'm just enjoying having a seat at the table. So I'd like to say that being a museum anthropologist, most people kind of look at me and say, "What in the world? How do you do it? Does anybody care?" And once I start to talk about the fact that even children can get excited about doing this, it takes on a different flavor. So I want to go, if you allow me, and speak about a sala that you mentioned, started by Carter G. Woodson. And you can add to your facts, if you don't mind, the fact that under Asala, is the organization that began my work in museum anthropology. The African American Museum Association, at that time in 1983, they started in the early 70s, but it was organized under the auspices of Asala.
Okay.
And to me, that was really special.
Dr. Simon, pardon me for interrupting. I just want to remind people that Asala is the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, which was created by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the founder of Black History Month, which is where you began your work in museology anthropology.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a lot of times we just forget that fact, because speaking of communities, within the Black communities, we haven't been really recognized as museum goers. When these studies are done in museology, all these museum studies, very few Black museums are recognized or spoken about. And so it's really important for us to not think it's odd or elitist to be a museum goer, to go and study it, because they are the keepers of our history and culture. And going back to what we said just a few minutes ago, it started under that same organization that made sure that we did that. So go to a museum. I'm going to add to that. Go to a museum every week, every month. See what they're doing. They are the ones that's keeping your story. They're keeping their history. Find out what's missing in the stories that they tell, and be a part of that community.
And
so
also,
that's what Mrs. Kaya did.
Okay.
Virginia Kaya, when that was started. So I know it's a long way around getting back to Virginia Kaya, but from the time she was a little kid, she loved to draw, to carve, and she wanted to do it about the people who looked like her. And she was turned away from museums.
Mm.
And her mother, who was a leader in the NAACP, and when Baltimore became one of the largest branches on that eastern seaboard, they were second in the country at one point. She told this little girl of hers who loved to do art and loved her people that one day she would have a museum, and one day that museum would be she would make sure, she knew her daughter would make sure that it was open to anybody that wanted to do it. And a lot of times, because we don't think of our museums as important as some of the others, we miss the fact that they are the ones that are the keepers of our culture. And as I tell my grandson, we need to use culture with a capital K.
Yes.
Culture spelled with a capital K means you have an extreme sense of your own history and culture. Not an extremist, but an extreme sense of who you are as a people. And that's why it's important, at least for me, to preach that sermon 24/7, 365.
And Deborah, you've been doing this, the Kaya Museum, but that's not the only one. You've documented, because often, as you pointed out, people don't expect us to be in museums. And so what a lot of Black people have done is in their own homes, or in spaces where they have access to, they've actually created museums. How many of these beyond the Kaya Museum have you documented in your research?
My goodness. If I tell your story, I tell the story of a museum. Mm-hmm. The same way when you go in someone's home and you see a lot of poetry books, or you see books, or you see music, anything that deals with the culture, that deal with our experiences. Museum means it's a place where we call it what we call it because it's about a collection. And we're all natural collectors. We're all natural collectors. So there's no shortage of museum spaces. When I come to town, I look at churches. I look at individual homes. I look at cemeteries. Mm-hmm. Very rarely do we think about participating in that. And some of them are endangered, just like some of our Black museums, because after that saying goodbye, a lot of times we don't go back to see what's happening with those spaces.
And so a lot of the places that you've documented have disappeared, and Kaya House was almost on the verge of disappearing. Tell us what happened and how you got involved in helping to preserve it.
Certainly. One of the things that was very important to me was to understand that museums aren't just about the buildings. Museums are also about the individuals, as I said, who are keeping the history and culture. And when I went back to Baltimore to help with my mother, who was had dementia, and my father was her caregiver, I was able to get a job with Morgan State University. Well, that little girl whose mother told her that she would have a museum one day also had a museum in Baltimore. And fortunately, it did not face the same problem as the Kaya Museum in Savannah, because Virginia fought to get somebody to take care of it. And she went to Morgan State University. So I was a part of a team that was looking at the redesign of that, because it was taken over by the university. Her mother was a woman by the name of Lily Carroll Jackson, Carroll. Carroll, like Charles Carroll. Those of us who know Baltimore history and know about the Carroll Mansion and those places. Well, when we did the genealogy of Virginia Kaya, and on her mother's side, they are descendants of Charles Carroll of Carrollton, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence.
Wow.
On the other side of her tree, she can trace that lineage back to Africa. And so that family, the Mitchells and Jacksons, because her sister married Clarence Mitchell Jr., who was a congressman. And she has nephews that were in the Senate and City Council. And her sister was one where Virginia integrated the museum school in Pennsylvania because she was turned away from Baltimore. Not only the museums, but even studying art and being accepted into the only schools that offer the museum and art. So she had to go to Philadelphia, and she was one of, I think, 6 students at that time. She was born in 1911, so we're talking a little while ago.
Yes. And so what is the status of the Kaya House Museum now? Where do things stand?
Oh, I'm excited. I'm excited. In about another month, they're going to start the construction of the building. Last year, after we did the fight for a historical marker, when I say we, I'm talking about the Friends. We formed the Friends of the Kaya group under ADME, the African Diaspora Museology Institute. We call it ourselves ADME. And under ADME, the Friends of the Kaya, we did the work to get a historical marker placed. And around that same time, we became, we applied for places in peril with the Georgia Historic Preservation. And it was then bought. It was in probate. So we had to get it out of probate, and Historic Savannah Foundation had it as a part of a revolving fund. And about a year ago, they went through trying to find a dedicated buyer. We were fortunate to get the Galvin Foundation, an organization out of New York who had an interest in Kyla Brownville, a historic area where the museum resides. And they were the ones that won the bid for that building. And I don't all the time use bad language, but one of the things I told them, like, now that you have it, just fix the damn house. Just fix that house. Because it does not have to be a replica of what it was before, because she was so innovative with her look. It wasn't a museum as this colonial concept of what a museum is. She had her own vision, and she called her museum in Savannah and the one that she did to honor her mother in Baltimore, Museums for the Masses. Meaning all of those who would normally not be welcome or appreciated.
And so, Deborah, I wonder, and Yusef, you may have some questions too, is that, I've been, sort of overseeing as you've been navigating, collecting all this information, not only about the Kaya Museum, but also just what I call Black grassroots museums. They're not sort of formally institutionalized. They're not funded by city or state, but, or even foundations. People are doing this on their own. And I know that you are the guest editor of the first special issue of Museum Anthropology that is all about Black museums. And these are not the formal national museums, but actually small museums. And I've written a commentary about one in Africa Town, because in fact, Miss Lorna Woods, who is one of the descendants of Cujo, who is one of the original enslaved people who were Africans who were brought over after slavery had ended on the Clotilda, she has collected materials about her family, and she's created her own museum, and it's actually in what they call the Mobile Public Training School. So it sits in the back there. It's not in a formal structure. And so these are the kinds of things that people need to recognize. As you say, we're all collectors and we all have them. So let's just say final words. If you had to tell people something that you want them to remember about the importance of this collecting that we do, whether it's in a formal museum or not, what is it that you want to talk to them about?
I think the most important thing for me is that we all remember that museums aren't always those formal buildings. Museums are us. Museums are the people. And call it the anthropologist you taught me to be, Dr. Irma. But we know that if we look at people through all times, as anthropologists do, and the world that they live in and they create, we leave a footprint. And I want you to think about, what is the footprint that you're leaving? Because somebody has to come along, and they won't know that story if you don't tell them.
Right.
So not only have all this wonderful stuff around you, don't make people guess. And let's be honest, it's not always Black people that are going to pick up your story. So tell it in your own voice, in your own words. Tell us, because object-based learning is the most important learning we can do in this time of trying to counsel out Black people and make us something other than what we are. We are the ones who people the world. Tell your story through your stuff. Find those things. If Mama did this thing and you're doing it and you don't know about it, write it down so that when your grandchild or your I'm a great grandmother now, when that great grandbaby comes along, they don't have to figure it out. They then tell the story. That's what happened with Africa Town. That's what happened with the work of the Clotilda. They were they were about to be canceled out as a people. Highway went right through all of that wonderful community that they had put together. But the people had the story in them.
Yes.
And they continued to tell the story. Now, in this day and time, we can do that in the most beautiful way. You find it.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be this colonialized version of it. And I'll document it. Just let me know.
Yeah. And I want to thank you for joining us, because I think what you've given us is a sense that Black history is bigger than just the books. It's about collections, and those can be very private collections. They can be in facilities.
It can be about food.
They can be about food. They can be recipes. They can be photographs.
Could be about medicinal ways that we keep ourselves healthy. If we don't pass that on, we're going to be taking things and doing things that are doing detriment to us. That's against our own nature and stuff. So it's all about the way we live.
And how we educate ourselves. And so I want to thank you for coming, because we have an educator who's going to join us and tell us about the work that she's been doing as a community advocate. So thank you, Dr. Deborah Johnson-Simon. We appreciate your sharing with us your story of the Kaya Museum and the work that you do with the African Diaspora Institute Museum. So Museum Institute. So thank you so much. So Cooper's suggesting that we just have you stay if you don't mind. And I'm going to bring on Dr. Alicia Gibson. She is an educator and community advocate. She currently teaches in the liberal arts department of the Minneapolis College of Art and Design and is running to serve as the 50 House Representative. That's AliciaGibson.com. And she has a PhD from the University of Minnesota, a law degree from the University of Colorado School of Law. She studied peace and conflict resolution at American University in Washington, D.C. I think she's moved around as much as I have. Most recently, she's completed her training in restorative justice and restorative practices. She enjoys learning deeply about how we organize our social lives and about people and cultures around the world. She's an anthropologist, in effect, and has lived in South Africa, Germany, and Japan. Alicia is passionate about building collaborative community partnerships, the environment, criminal justice reform, education, and caring for people. She serves as a board member for the nonprofit micro grants, as secretary of the board for Sue Visual Arts Center, and as vice chair of the DFL Feminist Caucus. And so I think there's an event that's coming up that Alicia can tell us about. So if you can bring her in.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me here. I think that Pastor Lorraine Gurley is also in the studio and ready to jump in. She's one of my good friends and colleagues in this project. But when we were filling in the JOT form, it wasn't quite working for her. So she didn't get to upload her bio and her information. But yes, we are a collective group of people working to have a celebration of our elders. And I really like the way that we here come at the end. First, we've had kind of a discussion of how we celebrate our folk tales, our stories from our different cultures. And now we've had this wonderful conversation about our museums, the way that we keep history, encouraging people to be the keepers of history in all of the different ways, from the recipes and the homemade cookbooks to, archiving the documents and the photos of your families. And now we're here to say you have living members of history in your own family by the way of elders. And we want this Valentine's Day to be about celebrating the living history among us. And we are going to be doing that at the Capri Theater. We have a dinner at 5:30, and the tickets for dinner will be closing soon so that Pastor Gurley can get the food ready for it. And you can learn more about our event at legacieSMN.org. And then there is a show afterwards at 6:30 where we're going to have a lot of celebrated guests, and we're going to honor our awardees. We're going to have the Sounds of Blackness. We have Reg Chapman, who is our MC, and a keynote speaker, Senator Bobby Joe Champion. But I'm going to pass it off to Pastor Gurley, who can tell us a little bit about the people that we are celebrating.
And before you do that, Alicia, let me just read Pastor Lorraine Gurley's bio. She's a graduate of Concordia University. She resided and raised her family in North Minneapolis, which of course is where my history is. Did we meet when I was there? I'm sure our paths crossed. Yes. And has spent decades working with and supporting children and families in the community. Pastor Gurley has over 25 years of experience as a grief and trauma specialist with the certification from the Grief Recovery Institute. And she conducts workshops in grief recovery through her business accolades and expression of love. Through her business, she also provides catering and event planning for those who want to celebrate their loved ones, because celebrating life and creating community gatherings is an essential component of resilience and healing. Amen to that. She also has specialized expertise in advocacy and mentorship, and she served as a court-appointed guardian for Hennepin County Probate Court and continues to serve as a volunteer advocate for vulnerable adults as well as a mentor to young men and women with classes in etiquette and life skills in the Twin City area. And now she's working as an advocate for adults and children in the child protective system. So tell us about this amazing program that you and Alicia have put together. And I wish I could get on a plane and come to it.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name again is Lorraine Gurley, and I am a community person. I'm actually from St. Paul, Minnesota, and my background is pretty great as far as African heritage and things of that nature, but we won't talk about that. Let me tell you about our awardees. We are a group of men and women who have gotten together. We come every Tuesday up to the High B, and we just meet everybody. And we've been doing it now for about 2 or 3 years since the pandemic started. This is what started us there. And, we just wanted to get together and celebrate our elders because it's like they get left out. Not everybody gets left out, but a lot of them that do things in our communities that never get talked about enough. And they're always doing something. So we decided that we would showcase some of them, and we want to continue this on every year, so that we let them know how much that we love them, how much that we thank them, how much that they have given to us. We want to give something back to them. So
could you tell us how people can participate in this?
Yes, they can come to our show. Like Ms. Alicia has said, we'll be putting on a celebration for our elders up at the Capri Theatre on Valentine's Day. And so some of them will be getting dinner. Well, all of them will be getting dinner, and they have 2 guests that they can bring with them. And then we have a wonderful show that will happen after that. And so some of our legacies awardees will be Walter Q. Bank. Everybody knows him from KMOJ. Absolutely, Mr. Mgeni, from KMOJ Radio. And he's always doing something in the community. And we just love him. And he's also one of the members of our church too. But he's just a great guy all around. You can call him. He's going to tell you yes. And he just doesn't get we feel like he doesn't get what he needed to just let him know we love you, we appreciate you, and we thank you. Richard Jacolas, he has been in the education department forever. He has worked at North High School, Hall Elementary, just everywhere. And he's been a coach. He did coaching for so many years in North Minneapolis, and he's just a great role model. And we just want to let him know that we see you, we love you, and we appreciate you. Augustine Willie Dominguez, he goes without saying, he has been around forever.
Yes, he has.
He has, and he's been in our Senate. I think he was a council member or something with the Capitol over here in St. Paul, Minnesota. And he's just you see him, he is just the coolest guy. He dresses nice. He looks good every time you see him, no matter what he's going through. And he just needed to be celebrated. So we wanted to bring him in this year. We also have, oh my goodness, so many of Lucille, Shirley. We have Shirley Gardner. She does outstanding work in the community. She's grandma, great grandma, auntie, whatever you need her to be, that's what she is. She's a great lady in the church. She provides different things for the church that she belongs to, and we want to show her some appreciation as well.
Is there a fee for people to come? So continue with the rest of the people.
Oh, we have Chief Boosie, we call him Boosie.
Oh, yes.
Miss Natando was his beautiful wife. She recently passed away. He does the Storytellers Alliance, and I think that's like nationwide now.
Yes.
So he has some other things in the work as well. But we wanted to just show him our gratitude to him. He's just an outstanding guy.
And of course, his daughter is currently the executive director of the University of Minnesota's Urban Research and Outreach Engagement Center, UROC.
Yeah, UROC, absolutely.
Makeda Zulu.
Yes, Makeda. And matter of fact, let me just say something about Miss Makeda. When my kids were at North High School, they went to every Black college in the country. because she would take the kids when she worked at the Y all over the country.
Yeah.
And she did that every year to give them an opportunity to see the colleges that they could literally be a part of if they chose to.
Yes.
And she just did an excellent job. I just wanted to throw that in there.
So we got a few minutes. Who is the last person on here?
Last person is Chief Arredondo. Arredondo, he was our chief of police for several years. And he's just an awesome guy. He's an awesome guy. His presence is so well needed in our community at the time that he was our chief. He did an excellent job.
So is there an admissions charge for this event? And I think the website is www.legasiesmn.org.
Yes,
if you want to get more information.
If you wanted to eat dinner, there was a price for the dinner. I believe it's that $50, Miss Alicia, for the dinner, and they have different selections that you can choose from. And I think that's going to be closing this week, if I'm not mistaken, on the 8th. So there's still time to get tickets. And if you want to see the show, it's free of charge. They just wanted you to go online and put your name in there so that they can seat you and just be awesomely taken care of.
Well, I would like to at least volunteer to buy a ticket, and you can give it to someone who wouldn't be able to come otherwise. And so get in touch with me after the show, and I will Venmo you or whatever it is, so that someone can go as my guest.
And one thing I wanted to say, Yusef, I don't know if you remember me or not, but me and you worked at the City Inc. together when United for Peace was there. Different things. You and my cousin Bobby Hickman.
I never forget a pretty face, Lorraine.
So we've got a few minutes left, and so I'm going to ask people, as we think about sort of the range of what Black history and culture encompasses, let's just get some final words from people. I think Reiko has already left, but she left us with a very inspiring of what she's doing and how she is in fact preserving and carrying on the traditions of her heritage, which is quite, not just one, but multiple heritage mixed in together. What about you, Alicia? What would you say as a way to close out this discussion on Black history?
Well, when Reiko was on, I was so excited because I'm actually a Japanese American also. And we celebrate in my house Children's Day, which is the story of the carp. It comes from that. You hang your fish out on the front of your house, and you have a fish for each child in your house. And you want to teach your children to be strong like carp. So, those, even though my children now, you would never guess that they're Japanese American. We try to bring those kind of elements in. And I think that for me, Black history is a moment for us to really think about our history in this whole country and how we can each participate in a way of lifting up each other's stories. I'm so grateful to be able to participate in this show and in this project with Pastor Gurley and doing that for each other.
And Pastor Gurley, final words, and we've got to move quickly. So.
Okay. Well, for me, it means a lot because I have an uncle who was world-renowned, and he's part of Black history, Gordon Parks. So I grew up with knowing a lot about it, and I encourage everyone to be able to tell their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, so that our heritage doesn't get lost in the mud, so to speak. It's very important to keep that going. And
so, Cooper, you heard that. Gordon Parks, that's another show, so we need to keep her in mind. Dr. Deborah Johnson-Simon, final words.
Yes. What most of us don't really understand is that this Black Museum movement is really about us. And don't walk past Black museums and think, been there one time and that's enough. They cannot survive on that. It's a story. You have someone who's willing to listen. Tell it to me about your experience going to a museum. If there's a museum in your home, I want to know that story. So there's someone that'll listen, and we'll be forming friends, and you can become a part of the Friends of ADME that will help and be someone who will tell your Black museum story. So do it today.
People can contact you via the Facebook page on ADME, right? That's on
Yes.
Facebook. Okay.
Yes.
Yusef,
Like
I've
to,
kind of taken it over. So final words.
like to acknowledge Cameron and Don Shelby for their listening and appreciate it. And I also want to thank you and say happy Black History Month to everyone.
Absolutely. And so everybody, thank you for joining us. And to our audience, we thank you for joining the conversation with Al McFarlane. Don't forget to subscribe so that you can get notices about it.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.